My name's Mordecai. I was born about 400 years ago in Russia, and I found there a wife, a wonderful woman, a Jewess named Sarah, and we got married and we had 2 children. One was called Adam and one was called Tamar, but we weren't happy in Russia at all. And the values of the state were so different from our own values, and many of my friends had emigrated to Israel where they felt more comfortable, but we weren't able to do that. The state had clamped down on emigration, so we were stuck where we were. Then we heard a rather remarkable thing that had happened, that Russian forces had invaded Israel. But instead of winning, which you might expect them to do, they were actually repulsed and they were sent back into Russia. And we heard this rumour that the Jewish Messiah had come. And we were intrigued, we'd hardly believe it. And we were together as a family all talking about this, when suddenly there was a knock on the door. And 2 men appeared, asking to come in. Now they were strange men, we'd never seen them before, and yet there was something vaguely familiar about them. We didn't quite know what. And they said to us that our presence in Israel was required. Well, how were we going to get to Israel? We weren't allowed to leave. They said, never mind about that. And they held our hands, and the next moment we were in a new, different place. And I looked over the other side of the room and saw one of my friends who we'd enjoyed company in Moscow together. He was the one that had emigrated earlier. I realised we were in Israel. We were in the land that God had promised to our fathers. And they said, well, this is the men. They were angels actually, weren't they? These men that had come and had taken us away in this miraculous way. They said, don't worry about packing things or anything of that kind, because everything will be provided for you. And we realised that what had happened was a fulfilment of a prophecy that was in our Old Testament. It's in Isaiah chapter 43 and in verse 5. This is what God had said to the people, to our ancestors. Fear not, for I am with thee. I will bring thy seed from the east and gather thee from the west. I will say to the north, Russia, give up, and to the south, keep not back. Bring my sons from far, my daughters from the ends of the earth, even every one that is called by my name. For I have created him for my glory. I have formed him, yea, I have made him. That had happened to us. We were the ones that were fulfilled that prophecy. But then suddenly we were just getting used to the idea of being in that land, the land that had been promised to our fathers so long ago, and to feel comfortable there, when we were invaded again. But this time it wasn't from Russia, it was from all the nations of Europe who had been ganging up against this new ruler in Israel, our Messiah, Jesus of Nazareth, and invaded the land. Now, we were recruited into the army. Well, we'd never had any military experience, so we were a little bit apprehensive about it. But we were together with a whole collection of men and women who had been made immortal. We knew they were all powerful, like the men who had collected us from our home in Moscow. And we needn't have been afraid, because the invading army approached and we were easily able to vanquish them. They melted away and we conquered them, and we realised that this was the fulfilment of another prophecy. It was in Isaiah again, this time chapter 51, that we were the fulfillers of a prophecy. It's in verse 20, chapter 51. Thy sons, is that Isaiah 51? No, it's 41, I think. I think it's 41. Let's look at It isn't actually 41, but there's a similar passage in 41, and it's in verse 15. Behold, it says, I will make thee, and it's talking to Israel, a new sharp threshing instrument, having teeth. Thou shalt thresh the mountains and beat them small, and shall make the hills as chaff. Thou shalt fan them, the wind shall carry them away. And this is said to that nation which is called like a worm. Verse 14. Fear not, thou worm, Jacob, ye men of Israel. I will help thee, saith the Lord, and thy Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel. And that reference I really meant was Jeremiah 51, which says something really similar. This is the way that God will help his people. You can get it like it if you want. And verse 20, he has said to our ancestors, and he says to our people, the Jewish people, thou art my battle axe, verse 20, and weapons of war. For with thee will I break in pieces the nation. With thee will I destroy kingdoms. With thee will I break in pieces the horse and his rider. And with thee will I break in pieces the chariot and his rider. And that was happening. We were doing that. We were breaking in pieces the enemies of Israel and the enemies of God. And now the kingdom can be established. The kingdom of Israel. What a wonderful thing. The kingdom restored in the land that was promised to our fathers, to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob. It's a wonderful thing to have peace. And that was what happened then. The next thing, a time of peace. And all the factories that were in the world that were making armaments, that were making missiles and guns, they were all converted to making tractors and combine harvesters, things that you could use to reap the fruit of the earth. It was a wonderful time. Peace. And we had a king, King Jesus, and one of his names was the Prince of Peace. A time of peace. And how different that was from the times that we'd experienced in the world when we were at home, sort of, in Moscow. The other wonderful thing that we were able to witness very soon after that was the building of a beautiful temple, a marvellous place designed by our God, the God of Israel. And this temple was to be the place where all the peoples, not just of Israel, not just of our nation of Israel, for we were the citizens in the kingdom of God, and we were proud to be so, and privileged, but also humbled, because we felt ashamed at first. When we saw Jesus, we all met him, he talked to us, and we felt ashamed at first that it was our ancestors that had killed him. But he was so kind, he was so considerate, and so encouraging to us. And he encouraged us to make the most and enjoy and work in his kingdom, which was really his Father's kingdom, the kingdom of God. And this temple was the place where all the peoples of the earth were going to come. In fact, if we just go to Micah's prophecy, because we were able to value our prophecies, the prophecies that we had known about, but we hadn't realised how wonderful they were. In that 4th chapter of Micah and the 3rd verse, speaking about this man now whom we'd met and talked to, this kind, powerful man, Jesus of Nazareth. He shall judge among many people and rebuke strong nations afar off. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up a sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. But, and here's this wonderful situation now that we enjoyed, they shall sit every man under his vine and under his fig tree, and none shall make them afraid, for the mouth of the Lord of hosts hath spoken it. And so, all the evil instruments that men had made to kill one another were done away with, and men weren't even allowed to learn about war. And that's how it's been now for a few hundred years. It's been like that in this wonderful time that we're living in. But these we mentioned the wonderful temple that was to be built. And just earlier on in that chapter, in that 4th chapter, we read the first couple of verses. In the last days it shall come to pass that the mountain of the house of the Lord, that's the Temple Mount, where the temple is, shall be established at the top of the mountains, and it shall be exalted above the hills, and people shall flow unto it. This is the people of the world, the people of all the nations that are subject to the kingdom of Israel. And many nations shall come and say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways, we walk in his paths. For the law shall go forth of Zion, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. That's what it's like now. All these people coming up to Jerusalem. And why do they come up? Well, they're coming up to keep a feast. It's in Zechariah chapter 14, where we can read what they're coming to do. Zechariah 14, verse 16. 14 verse 16. Shall come to pass that every one that is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem, those nations that we vanquished so easily, shall even go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. That's why they're coming. They're coming to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. How wonderful that is for us. Now there's something especially wonderful for us, because in the old days before we had our visits from those men who knocked on our door, Jews were despised. All the nations of the world and all the press, all the international press, found fault with the Jews. The Jews are always to blame for things that went wrong. Not so now. Everything's quite different. And we didn't realise it, but it actually says that in Zechariah's prophecy. We should have realised. In Zechariah chapter 8, for example, and verse 20. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, it shall yet come to pass that there shall come people, inhabitants of many cities in the world, and the inhabitants of one city shall go to another and say, Let us go speedily to pray before the Lord, to seek the Lord of hosts. I will go also. They were keen, and they are keen to come up. Yea, many people and strong nations shall come and seek the Lord of hosts in Jerusalem, and to pray before the Lord. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, in those days it shall come to pass that 10 men shall take hold of all languages of the nation, even shall take hold of the skirt of him that is a Jew, saying, We will go with you, for we have heard that God is with you. That never used to happen to us. It's marvellous that because of our God and because of our King, Jesus, men want to be with us. They have heard that God is with us. Well, we have a wonderful life now in the kingdom of our God, to be back in the land that was promised to our fathers of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, and to be fulfillers of that promise. We have looked very closely at the scriptures to read about how all these things were foreseen. And perhaps we can just look finally at Isaiah's prophecy, the 65th chapter, because this new arrangement is called a new heaven and a new earth. That's in verse 17. Behold, I create new heavens and a new earth. The former shall not be remembered, nor come into mind. I'm only remembering it now for your benefit. But we don't think about what it was like in Moscow all those years ago. It's so different now. Now we're appreciated. Now we are in our own land. Now our King is with us. Be ye glad and rejoice forever in that which I create. For behold, I create Jerusalem a rejoicing, and her people a joy. And I will rejoice in Jerusalem, and joy in my people. The voice of weeping shall be no more heard in her, nor the voice of crying. We know that we are going to die eventually. We will live, and we will live long. We read in this chapter, actually, a little bit later on, in verse 20, it says, A child shall die 100 years old, and the sinner being 100 years old shall be accursed. We are living longer, much longer than we used to live. But we will die, because we're only mortal, but we will die in hope that one day we will be raised again from the dead and made like unto these loving, faithful leaders that the previous speaker spoke about. So those men and women who have now been made immortal. We want to be like them, and that's what we hope for.